you have stepped into the world of the mundane, the strange, the absurd and insane. This is an ongoing quest to answer the question of what it means to be sentient. This is Surreal to Real. On this episode, we are joined by Joshua Suchon. Joshua is a journalist and broadcast announcer for the Albuquerque Isotopes. His third book, Murder in Pleasanton, Tina Faelz and the Search for Justice, is a true crime story about a 1984 cold case from his hometown. Suchon has been featured in numerous documentaries, including ones about Barry Bonds and the 1988 LA Dodgers, as well as on Cold Case. And now, here are the boys that you enjoys, James and Justin. Mr. Announcer Voice out.
Josh, welcome to Surreal to Real. Thanks for joining us tonight. How are you doing?
Thanks for inviting me. I'm wonderful. Yeah, this is fun.
Glad to hear. Justin, how are you?
I'm the greatest day of my life.
I didn't give you the end with us as Justin intro this time. You've moved up in the world.
I'm moving up. It's the greatest day of my life. I'm breathing.
So, Josh, we're going to go pretty deep on this one. I don't think we've really had an episode as of yet where we've talked about something so serious. So we're going to go play by play here. But for those that aren't familiar with you, why don't you give us the rundown, who you are and how you got to the point of writing the novel that we'll be discussing tonight.
I'll say this, and hopefully this will lead into this book. I spent my entire life watching sports, playing sports, reading sports, wanting to be involved in sports, studying sports journalism, and working in a wide variety of different types of sports journalism as a newspaper reporter, as a radio reporter, as a live TV sideline reporter, as a writing stories for magazines and online. And I always wanted at some point in my life to do something that did not have to do with sports, mostly just to prove to myself that I could do hardcore journalism. And I never knew exactly when that would be or what that would be in what context. And then something happened, and lo and behold, I end up writing a book about a murder that happened in my hometown when I was in the 5th grade that took 3 decades to solve.
Holy shit.
I think you floored him. So you currently, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you announced for the Isotopes now, is that right?
Yeah, at least before the pandemic. Play-by-play for the Albuquerque Isotopes, a name that was inspired by a Simpsons episode, and that is the Rockies AAA affiliate.
So you're in the 5th grade when this goes down, and we are talking about the murder of Tina Faelz. Am I pronouncing that last name correctly?
Faelz. Tina Faelz.
Was this in proximity to where you grew up? Like, was this kind of in the same neighborhood, or was it just something that kind of went through the zeitgeist of the town?
No, I was really close. So I was a newspaper delivery boy at the time. So I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning and got a bunch of stacks of newspapers that were on my doorstep and folded them and threw them all around to people's porches. And I was in the 5th grade. Tina was in the 9th grade. She lived 5 blocks down the street from me. I did not know her well, but I knew that this person existed at this house. One of my really good friends at the time, he lived on the same court, so I would see her, it was a very active neighborhood, lots of kids, everyone seemed to know each other. So I was very much aware of what happened. The story is she's walking home from school, and she's walking home from school because she was bullied. We didn't call it bullying back then, but she got picked on, and there were some girls who were making her life miserable. And so instead of taking the bus home where she was bullied on a regular basis, she decided to walk home, and she was walking home, taking a shortcut where, I know this sounds kind of crazy, but there was a tunnel that went underneath an interstate. And by walking underneath this tunnel, you would save yourself 30 minutes of walking if you were brave enough to walk underneath this tunnel. And it was a very popular shortcut. Students took it all the time. And in order to get from the same neighborhood that Tina and I lived in to get to the high school where she was attending, if you walked underneath this highway through this tunnel, then you could just save enormous amounts of time. So that's what she was doing. And she never reached the tunnel. Just before the tunnel, she was stabbed 44 times. In the middle of the afternoon, it was sometime between 3 and 3:15 in the afternoon, right next to the highway, and nobody saw it. Nobody saw what happened. There was a couple of students who were coming by taking the same route. They discovered the body. They went running to a nearby house to call 911. There was also a truck driver who had saw something as he was going by and wasn't sure, and went down and came back all the way around and got out of his truck and went down and got closer and realized that was a body. This is 1984. There's no cell phones yet. So then he goes to try and find a payphone, and a couple of 911 calls arrive at basically the same time. I'm aware of the story immediately. Word spread very quickly through my neighborhood. There might not have been Twitter or cell phones or text messaging, but
they probably would have blocked the story anyways.
Yeah, just the number of kids who were on bicycles, almost like, as messengers, just riding through the streets and just telling anyone who's in the front yard. And then he heard the police cars, and my sister knew the victim, and she knew it. It's like everyone was just constantly on the phone. What are you hearing? What are you hearing? What are you hearing? So that was my connection to it. And again, nobody saw it. There's no cameras. The police interviewed dozens and dozens, actually hundreds and hundreds of people, had dozens of suspects. And they thought they had a couple of people who might be prominent suspects, didn't pan out. And then the case just went cold. And for 27 years.
Sorry, Josh, can you just repeat that last bit? Because you kind of got rain fadey there.
Where do you want me to restart it at?
Oh, just you're saying the end bit about everybody calling and there was no real. Anyways, it's okay. You just kind of you kind of gapped out there, but that's okay. So you were saying that you were kind of going into how the case went cold.
The police just didn't have any real evidence. They couldn't. It was a mystery to them on what happened. And so the case went cold, and the mystery just deepened at that point. And for people, Pleasanton, California, it is now a fairly wealthy middle-class suburb. In 1984, it was not like that. People moved to Pleasanton because it was a cheap place to buy your first house. It was the sticks. There was no BART trains that would connect you to Oakland or San Francisco. It was a very quiet place. It was only the fifth murder that had happened in Pleasanton since World War II. It was the first time that a child had been murdered since World War II. So it terrified the city. There's people who I remember at the time that have also told me since then that they went to bed with a baseball bat next to their bed, or with a knife, or with some other type of sharp object, because they were convinced that there was some crazy person who was going around Pleasanton and they might be next. And the longer that this case remained cold, the more that the mystery grew on just what happened to this girl.
So when you said I just wanted to touch on the connection with your sister. Was your sister in the same grade, or you said she kind of was at the very least aware of Tina?
Yeah, she was 1 year younger. So I'm in the 5th grade. My sister was in the 8th grade, and Tina was in the 9th grade. Gotcha.
So I'm assuming your sister then kind of probably was not only aware of her, but maybe even ran in the same circles. So how did, can I ask how that affected your sister, like directly? Is that too much of a ask?
No, it's not too much of an ask. So I'll actually move forward in this, if you don't mind, to kind of start to get to the point, so to speak. Yeah, no. So in 2011, there was a DNA hit. And so Tina's purse was found in a tree above her body. And that purse sat in evidence for well over 20 years. That purse was submitted to the DNA, the FBI lab in Virginia, along with a lot of other evidence from multiple other cases that police departments were working on. And they got a hit. They got a DNA hit. And it was someone who was serving time in jail at the time in Santa Cruz, California, which is about an hour away from Pleasanton, near the Pacific Ocean. And lo and behold, the DNA hit came back, and it was a student. It was someone who was also a freshman at the time, and it was somebody who lived right across the street from the crime scene. And this story starts to make the rounds. And so I remember I called my sister, and I said, hey, they finally solved the Tina Faelz murder. It was this guy, Steve Carlson, this guy who was a student. I said, did you know this guy? And she goes, oh, yeah, he used to walk me home from school.
That's
And I
freaky.
wait, what? Was this guy at our house? She goes, and I said, well, I'm asking her more questions. And she goes, oh yeah, we always figured he did it. He confessed the crime to me at a party one night. So once my sister says, I know this guy, basically ran in the same circles with him and that scene of people going to parties. And he used to walk her home from school, and he once confessed the murder to her at a party. And then some things were going on in my life at the time where I felt like I was probably going to have more free time than I wanted. But nonetheless, I wanted to be able to do something with that free time. That is what inspired me to start to research it further and ultimately it took me 4 years. I thought it was going to take me 4 months. It took me 4 years. But those are the different factors that led to me writing this book.
And so if he's confessing to your sister at a party one time and she's not really, I guess, saying anything, it sounds like she maybe thought it was just a drunk guy saying something, which does happen. I mean, I think we've all been there. So you're drunk, somebody says some weird shit to you and you're just like, yeah, okay, bud. So I totally get that. But was there other people in the community that he had confessed verbally to as well that were aware that this guy did it?
Yeah, so that's what became one of the most fascinating parts of my research, is that if you ask the students who attended the high school at the time, it's called Foothill High in Pleasanton, if you ask them, all of them almost verbatim would say, oh yeah, we knew it was him. He would say it, he would confess, or he would make cryptic comments. And most of the time when he would confess, he would then say, no, I'm just kidding. Or, he would say things like, have you ever wondered what it's like to put a knife inside somebody's body? Or he would say, why don't we go say hello to Tina's mom? Tina's mom worked at a 7-Eleven that was in town. Why don't we go say hello to Tina's mom? So he would just say,
fucking monster, Jesus.
So how old was he when he was going around saying this? Was he 17, 18, or was he still in high school?
He was still in high school. He was a freshman as well at the time of the murder. He stayed in school for about another year, and then he dropped out, and then he went to a continuation school. He ended up in juvenile hall for a different crime. He's someone who was already doing a lot of alcohol and a lot of drugs, and then after the murder, he dramatically increased his drug use. He really got into meth and some really hardcore drugs. So the part that's fascinating, though, is that there's all of these students who think, well, he did it because he's weird. His nickname was Creepy Carlson. He would confess, and then he'd say, I'm just kidding, or he'd make these cryptic comments. But the police interviewed him, and they interviewed him multiple times, but they just didn't think that a 16-year-old kid was capable of doing this. So in the case of my sister, she said that she went to the police. There is not a record and a police report of my sister going to the police, but my sister's boyfriend at the time, his name is in the police report. So I think that it was about a year and a half after the murder that enough people started to come forward and say things to the police that they decided that they needed to reinvestigate him. So over 2 days, they talked with him when he was in juvenile hall, and he admitted to the police officers, yes, I have told people that I did it, but I did not really do it. I just did to make me look like a badass or a tough guy, or, just because people think I did it. And so, it allows me to, again, just to be a tough guy. And so people will leave me alone.
And you had sent me your follow-up article. I know we're jumping ahead again, and we'll loop back into the particulars, but he's now confessed. Is that right?
Yes. So he was arrested in 2011. The trial took place in 2014. He was found guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 26 years to life. About 6 to 9 months later, an appeals court took the sentence back to second-degree murder. Now, a lot of people think that first-degree murder is based on how gruesome the crime is, and when someone gets stabbed 44 times, they think that's gruesome, that must be first-degree. But really, first-degree has to do with, was it premeditated? And there was not enough evidence to suggest that it was premeditated. So it went back to second degree, 16 years to life. But even then, he maintained his innocence. He appealed. He told the judge that he was innocent. He wrote me a letter from prison in which he wrote in all capital letters, I am innocent. And all of that took place around 2015. And now 5 years later, somewhat out of the blue, although not completely out of the blue, he decided that he was finally going to confess. So he wrote 3 different letters. One is basically his life in crime. And then the other 2, one is to Tina and one is to Tina's family. And over the course of 13 handwritten pages, he confesses over a dozen times. So other than these drunken cryptic comments and kind of confessions, he went 36 years denying that he had anything to do with it. And now he has finally admitted that he did it.
What do you think made him change? Was it the reduction in the sentence? There's probably 2 most likely theories. Number one is that maybe he just finally found God, or maybe finally found, self-conscious in prison. When you're there, there's lots of programs that you go through. You talk to psychologists, you get psychic examinations. You spend a lot of time basically trying to piece together what decisions you made in your life and how it led to where you are right now. And that's cause for a lot of self-reflection. Maybe he just felt the guilt and realized it was time to finally come clean. That's one theory. The other theory is the much more cynical view, which is that if he wants to get paroled early or just after the 16 years, you have a much better chance of getting paroled if you confess to your crimes. Now, it's not mandatory, but parole boards usually look at you much differently if you have shown that you have remorse for what you did and that you have done things in prison to show that you will not continue a life of crime once you get out. So this could just be his way of trying to manipulate the parole board to get out sooner, or maybe he found his conscience. I'll give you a third cynical theory. He read your book. Justin, you okay there?
Yeah. I my internet cut out halfway through, but I think I'm caught up. That's incredible though. Because I think everyone's gone to high school with someone who brags about things that they don't do. So I can always imagine, I'll give you the best examples. I went to school and I not to gloat myself a little bit, but I sold drugs, and I knew there was a guy who was claiming to sell the same drugs I was selling. Like Marcy gets caught with some pot, and it's this guy who sold it because he's bragging that he had sold it. Although I very well know that Marcy's got the pot I just sold her. And this fellow was very unstable. He came to school with throwing knives. And it's just like, what the F is this guy doing? So you do have those characters sometimes that when they do boast about things, it's really hard to take them seriously, right? Especially if they're like the weirdo and the odd one in school. Sometimes you can look at these people and be like, this guy's just exaggerating for effect.
Now, the other... Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say that I think a lot of it, especially from the adult standpoint, is that this was an incredibly gruesome crime. When you look at Steve Carlson's photos in jail, and he looks like this scary, menacing guy that you do not want to walk down the street next to. But if you look at the photo of him from high school, he looks like the all-American kid, right? He's got blonde hair. He's got wide shoulders. He's got blue eyes. He's got a nice smile. He just seems like a normal all-American kid. I think it was just really hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around this 16-year-old kid was capable of doing something this vicious.
I read somewhere, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that he was also picked on. So I guess we're going to move into motive, right? So what I read his standpoint on the motive, which you can explain, but I also would like to know your standpoint on what you uncovered and what you think the motive might be as well. Or if you think he was telling the truth.
Well, we'll get into how he was bullied and how he was a bully, because the two are very interchangeable. In terms of a motive, I don't know if we're ever going to know for sure. In his confession letter, he basically asserted that Tina was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, that it could have been anybody. And maybe that's true. Possibly that's true. The only thing that might be a motive is that Tina had a very good friend from junior high. They were now going to separate high schools. The way that Pleasanton worked back then, it was so small. There was only one junior high. There wasn't enough room for all of the students. And so roughly roughly half the junior high kids in Pleasanton were bused to the nearby city, Dublin. So that's where Tina and Steve went to junior high. And then Tina had a friend, and Steve had an extremely inappropriate relationship with her numerous times. Not one night, not one day, but dozens and dozens of times. Did very inappropriate things with her.
When you say inappropriate, would it can we dig in a bit?
He
there?
raped her.
Okay.
He raped her.
Okay.
On a regular basis. He raped her.
And
Tina was aware.
how old was this young lady?
They were both in the 8th grade at the time.
Both in
that
the
it occurred.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah. I have an entire chapter about her. I don't use her real name. But at lunchtime across the street of school, the back alleys of the campus. Tina was aware that her friend was being raped on a regular basis, and she knew who did it. Now, once high school began, Tina's friend goes to this high school, Tina and Steve go to this other high school. I don't think that it was still happening by the 9th grade, but Tina was aware of what had happened. So obviously she did not like him. And so when they crossed paths on that fateful day, maybe it started as some type of verbal altercation. Maybe Tina said something like, I know what you were doing to my friend, and I'm going to tell the police, or I'm going to tell adults, or I'm going to tell teachers. Maybe Steve decided that Tina was now going to be his next victim. I have no idea to know what that conversation was like, but that's the closest thing that we have to a motive, is that Tina's very good friend, was raped by him, and Tina was aware of it.
Now, two-part question. You said that she took this path. A lot of people took this path. And is it known if that was like a regular way home for her? And then with what you just said, I'm going into the premeditation angle, because obviously he had a knife on him. So if that is the case, then it was premeditated. What's your thoughts around that?
So Tina would sometimes get picked up at school by her mom. Her mom would give her a ride home sometimes, but not always, depending on her work situation. Tina usually got a ride to school from her mom and then walked home. It wasn't common knowledge that she was going to be walking home every single day on that path, but it was common knowledge that there's a lot of students who would be walking on that path. Now, what Tina did was, school gets out at 2:20, and Tina was supposed to go to detention, which starts at 2:30. She had detention because she was frequently late being at school, so she has detention. But Tina doesn't want to go to detention, most likely because that day at school, there was a bunch of girls who threw rocks at her and basically said, we're going to kick your ass when school gets out. And Tina knew that some of those girls were in detention as well. So she doesn't want to go to detention where these girls are. She doesn't want to leave school right at 2:20 with everybody else, because she doesn't know where these girls might be. So she's basically trying to play a little bit of self-defense here. She's trying to thread the needle. Detention gets out at 3:15. So there's two different waves of students that are taking this shortcut. One wave is those who leave school right around 2:20 or a little thereafter and walk through this path. And the other is people who went to detention and they're now leaving campus at roughly 3:15 and walking through this path. So Tina was murdered sometime probably around 3 to 3:15. So she didn't leave immediately. She didn't wait. So she kind of was somewhere there in the middle. And that's why nobody saw her. It was also a fluke, though, that nobody saw her. I think that it would be really hard to plan a murder in that location, because even though it was a field, there were still just so many people that came and went. A lot of kids would go in that area just to hang out. They'd smoke cigarettes. They'd dip some tobacco. They would just hang out and goof around. They'd catch, just run around, because there wasn't a whole lot else to do. So now, to go back to your other point about Steve and the knife, his bedroom was above the garage. And so from his bedroom, he looks out, and to his left, he can see the campus. Straight ahead, he can see this big open field where all the kids are walking through. To the right is the highway and the drainage ditch where she was ultimately murdered. So he's got a view of the whole thing from his bedroom. So he can see all of that. So if it had been a different student who was walking at that time, would he have done a similar thing and grabbed a knife in a drunken rage and gone out there and attacked that person? Or was it only because it was Tina? That I do not know.
Well, I was going to say, sorry, Jess, go ahead.
Yeah, it seems like in a situation like that, like anybody who takes catwalks, like that's what we call it up here, like just to cut through neighborhoods and that, yeah, I can see exactly what you're saying as far as the waves of the students go. And if he's just sitting there, especially like kind of stalking out the situation, camping, like, yeah, it seems to me like it'd be pretty easy just to wait for an individual, whether that was his intention or not. But, especially if you're kind of like an outsider, sticking around by a catwalk is not a bad way to get attention, regardless of who you are.
And I was gonna say that, touching on if he was actually watching and waiting, as Justin said, camping for her, right? Like just singling her out and waiting and watching and see if she's gonna come through. The amount of stab wounds, 44 stab wounds, typically speaking in murder cases from, the crime television that I watch when I'm bored. Well, I should say it properly. The crime television that my wife watches, and I go, enough of this doom and gloom. 44 stab wounds, usually something like that is found in a crime of passion, something that is most times premeditated. And when somebody flies into a blind rage, usually you see those on people that they know. If it's a murder that is, this just happened. I went nuts and it just happened. Typically speaking, you're not finding 44 stab wounds. That's a little bit more deliberate, right? So did they ever question him in regards, like now that he's confessed, is anybody talking to this guy being like, okay, come on, 44 stab wounds. This was obviously not just you being drunk and going looking for trouble.
No one's been able to ask him those questions because he had a parole board hearing and he basically waived his right to parole to the hearing. And as a result, DA could not ask him questions. Police could not ask him questions. I have tried to contact him in California State Prison. I've offered that he can call me collect, that he can email me, that he can write me, and I have not heard back from him. So we don't know.
How long ago did he send you that letter? How long ago was that?
He wrote me that letter around, it appeared in my book. So that would have been sometime late 2014, early 2015.
And I didn't ask, did he know you were writing the book at that time? Or
yes.
So he was aware.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I'll read you. I got the book, and so this is not the entire letter, but this is part of it. He writes, Josh, this is going to be a short letter. I am sorry I never sat down with you to give you my side of the story. I was legally advised not to. Trust me, I want to scream to the world my innocence. I also want to thank you for treating my sister with kindness and respect. That's why after this case gets overturned on appeal, you are the only person I'm going to talk to. I know you mean well by you writing this book. Josh, I am innocent, in all caps. Anyways, I'll write you again once I get sent to the prison, or I'll wait to hear from the appeals court. All my respect, Stephen J. Carlson.
Josh, does it not freak you out a little? What if this guy gets out? I mean, you're doing the journalist work, right? But like, does that twinge in the back of your head at all, or what?
The return address that I sent was my work address, not my home.
He's gonna show up at an Isotopes game,
right?
Fucking cheering. Also,
yeah.
I you know what? Like, I think it's extremely brave. Like, I always respect journalists who actually go for it like that hard, and it's like, you're trying to report the story the best you can with what you have, and for the fact that this guy's now reaching out to you, I think I would stop personally. I don't think I have the will of character to proceed after that. No. Yeah, you're innocent, man. Book shut down. I'm now writing a new book. It's called Why You're Innocent. So let's jump back in time to the murder itself, and just play a little bit of catch up on some questions I've been writing down here as we trucked along. Approximately how long was it between the murder and her body being found by the students?
About 15 minutes.
That short of a time, eh? And was she? I'm assuming the amount of stab wounds, she was deceased at that time,
Yeah.
or did they not approach and see, kind of thing?
She was deceased at the time.
She was deceased at the time. And did they have an estimation as to how long the attack was? Like, I don't know how long it takes to stab somebody that many times. So, fortunately, I don't know that information.
You're right. No, but she was last seen a little bit before 3 p.m. And the 911 calls arrived about 3:25, might have been 3:27. And they were also able to determine, remember, the truck driver is going south on Interstate 680. He looks to his right, sees something that doesn't look right, goes down to the next exit, gets off, goes back around, goes back up, has to get to the next exit. They timed that out. I also timed that out in my reporting multiple times at the exact same time of day. It takes about 10 to 12 minutes, which means he would have first saw her around 3:15. Somewhere between 3:12 and 3:17 is when he probably would have saw her for the first time. And then if she had been seen just before 3 o'clock when she was still alive, we're talking about a really, really small window there. We're talking about a 15-minute window. It's kind of a fluke that nobody saw her, really.
Okay. And
So this was like not even a set of like they didn't even have a full conversation. This was like a couple of sentences, and then like that tragedy that happens like immediately after, and then he just books it. Like he just gets up and leaves. Like not even like a 2 to 3 minute kind of window where this goes down, and then the guy just gets up and leaves.
Right. There's not really the ability of I'm going to get rid of this body, or how can I? It's just flee. It's flee and get out of there and run back home because you live across the street and you can get cleaned up.
Is that that's actually what I was going to ask, is his whereabouts known after the murder, or is that what he did? He like went directly home?
So that's where things get confusing. So let's actually back up and talk about that entire day. I'm going to give you my best interpretation of what I think happened, because people's memories are not so good when we're talking about something that happened 36 years ago, not to mention there was a lot of alcohol that was involved.
Yeah, and
But
people's memories aren't good for 5 minutes ago either, so I
Right.
totally get it.
what we do know is that his parents were out of town. They just decided they're going to go to Reno, Nevada, and they're going to go gamble and party and leave all the kids alone. There's an older sister who's graduated from high school. There's Steve, who's a freshman. And then there's 2 younger siblings who are twins who are in the 7th grade. So 4 kids get left alone. His parents go out to party. Steve decides, I'm going to have a party at home so I can be cool. So he goes to school and tries to find people who are going to drink with him. By some accounts, people told him to buzz off, to go away. Some people said, like, okay. We do know that some people ended up back at the house and they drank. And they drank a lot. And in his confession letter, he wrote that the friends who came over broke the liquor cabinet in his parents' room. They threw his mom's underwear around the room. And basically the house was kind of trashed. Steve goes back up to campus, even though he was basically was cutting school that day. He goes back to campus and, in his own words, acts like an idiot and basically picks a fight with a football player. Football player throws him into a dumpster. Other students then lock the dumpster, and they roll the dumpster over back and forth numerous times. So all of the food and all of the dirt gets all over him. Finally, there's a teacher from school, the woodshop teacher. He comes out, he unlocks it, sees Steve. Steve's humiliated. The teacher says to Steve, can smell the alcohol on his breath, get the hell out of here, go home, or no, go to the administration office. Steve instead goes home. He writes that he passed out.
And Josh, is that confirmed? Out of curiosity, It is confirmed that him being thrown in the dumpster happened. Like this is
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
The woodshop teacher testified at the trial that this happened.
Okay.
And I've talked with numerous other students who saw it.
Okay.
So yes,
I asked because it sounds like this guy's not a reliable source, right?
Yes, your instincts are correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he goes home. He passes out. He wakes up. He sees the house is in disarray. He starts drinking again. Now, there was another student who lived just down the street. His name is Todd Smith. And Todd told me that he went to Steve's house at lunchtime just to check on him. to make sure that he was not suicidal or anything, because he knew that this guy had just been humiliated on campus, and basically went home at lunchtime to see if he was okay. And so there was more people that were at the house in the middle of the day around lunchtime. Then those students go back to school. In terms of what happens next, that's where it's really confusing, because when the police arrived on the scene, they did something then that is different than what they would do now. Now, if there were students who might have saw something, they would talk to each one of them individually, one-on-one. Back then, they basically talked to the kids as a group, and the police report said, these 3 students gave the following accounts and list what they did.
Oh, no.
And in the process of that, Todd Smith ended up providing a quasi-alibi for Steve Carlson. Now, Todd has told me that he is extremely remorseful, that he just didn't think that a kid could do this. He didn't think that, they weren't great friends. They were friendly. They lived down the street from one another. They hung out a little bit. He didn't think that his friend could do that. He didn't think that a 16-year-old do it. So he basically lied to the police in order to just protect his friend, because he thought, well, there's just no way. There's just no way that he did that. However, again, this student at the time, Todd Smith, has later testified that when he saw Steve's hair was wet, as if he had just hopped in the swimming pool or as if he had taken a shower. The police never interviewed Steve Carlson that day. They did interview other students in the neighborhood. And we do know for certain that Steve was on the roof of his house with other students watching the police work the crime scene. And those other students had no idea that they were sitting next to the killer as they watched the police work the crime scene.
That's fucked. Yeah, that's pretty weird.
That is a bit fucked. So her body wasn't moved is what I'm getting out of that as well, right? Like,
correct.
So he just kind of went and did it and ran for it. And was the murder weapon found at the scene? Or no. Did they ever find
the murder weapon? Was never found.
Never found.
To this day, never found. Now, Steve wrote in his confession letter that he threw the knife into the field. But I don't know if I believe that, because the police searched the field. I have photos that the police took that day that shows a guy with a metal detector going all around there. And the next day, the police, along with there's this program called the Explorers. Explorers are kind of like, it's a fancy way of saying interns. And they did a grid search where you're shoulder to shoulder and you're walking, in a grid formation, in some cases getting down on your hands and knees and crawling through fairly thick field at times. And they never found the murder weapon. I talked to people. I talked to this guy. I talked to this guy who said it was, and again, memories are funny things.
What'd you say? What'd you say a second ago?
So I talked to this guy who said that he said it might have been a few weeks, it might have been a few months after the murder. And he's with Steve Carlson and with this other guy, and they're smoking some pot at someone's house or someone's garage. And Steve says, will you get rid of a knife for me? And this guy I talked to said that he was freaked out, that he was absolutely freaked out. And he said that he looked Steve in the eyes and said, did you kill Tina Faelz? And Steve said, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. And this guy said that he was freaked the F out, that he thought in his mind, I look into your eyes and I know you did it. And he said that he was just totally freaked out. Meanwhile, the other kid who was at this party was like, yeah, I'll get rid of the knife. And we don't know what happened to that knife or anything like that. But
I'm so grateful that you told me that story, because like I got like extremely weirded out, because just in my head I'm like, that knife came out of the chopping block on the counter. He went and did the crime, washed it off, put it back in, and mom's cutting pot roast with it the following fucking day. Like that, I was like, if that's what happened, that just adds another layer of disturbing macabre to this entire affair. which
Yeah.
could possibly be it. But I hope that's not the case. I hope this scumbag actually wanted people to get rid of the knife, and this junior scumbag got rid of it for him. I'll sleep a little more soundly at night with that in my brain. Ugh.
That's a weird one too, that if he used something in his own household, like, at one point or another, his family would have to put, like, where's the big knife? Or I don't mean that as a joke, but like at one point or another, like, that's just so weird. Like, and even what would you do if you're a parent and I just, as a complete out of their question, imagine you're this parent and you get back from this Reno trip and you're starting to put these pieces together and you're like you said, James, like your big knife is missing from the block, or one out of your 8 kitchen knives is missing. Sorry, I know that's way off there, Josh, but yeah.
No, it is interesting what you bring up, though, Justin, because the parents got back the next day. They didn't get back that night. They got back the next day. So again, you're the kids in this neighborhood. You're the kids at this house, and this murder happened across the street from where you live, and the parents are gone, and you're pretty freaked out. And then when the parents get back the next day, the older sister told me that the mom went through Steve's clothes and went through the attic and did all of these things. And I said to her, well, that sounds like your mom was at least a little bit suspicious of her own son, right? And the older sister admitted, yeah, maybe. I think she just wanted to know for sure. She just wanted to be able to eliminate that from her mind. But the fact that the mom did at least now, again, by the time the parents get home, it's been 24 hours. I mean, even the worst criminal can hide any evidence and get rid of things.
Yeah, well, and this is one thing I've noticed is that, especially as a lot of my friends have become parents, is you start to notice that, you may have a child, but you'll know if they're an odd one. Like, you'll know if they're not fitting in. You'll know if they're... your child
like us.
Yeah, well, I have 3 other siblings, not including step family, and my mother would know if the cake is missing in the fridge, which sibling to blame immediately, like me, the fat one, right? Each one of us has our own little quirks, but you can tell, even if you're a parent, you can tell if your son or your daughter's going through at least emotional trauma, let alone their reactions in the household, especially if you have well-adjusted siblings. They must have been able to spot something's wrong with him from a mile away, especially if you're saying that the mom, first thing her instinct was to let's just take a once over on the house.
Yeah, well, and then that also leads into, who was Steve before the murder, and then who did he become after the murder? And you mentioned earlier, James, about just bullying. And again, that's not a term that we used in 1984. So when I did my research,
it was called "growing the fuck up," is what it was called
right.
back in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you got called a bad name at school? Oh, come here. Never talk to me about this again, son. Stand up for yourself. No.
When you would talk to people from the neighborhood, they would say that Steve was always the annoying kid, right? That if they were trying to play some sport, he was the one who was cheating. Or if they were down in this creek, and they caught a little frog, he would just step on it and squash it instead of throwing it back. Or that he would grab cats by the tail and swing them around above his head. That he was just always the odd one. And he was always trying to instigate something. So did he get his ass kicked by other kids in the neighborhood? Yeah. Especially some of the older kids who were go away, you're annoying. But he was also he bullied other kids, and he was an absolute nightmare for all the girls in the area because he was extremely aggressive and really inappropriate with a lot of the different things that he said and that he did. I mean, just about everybody who I talked to who knew him had some story of him saying something, doing something. So did Steve get his ass kicked? Yeah. Did he get thrown in the dumpster that day at school? Yeah. It's also because he started at that day at school. And he was also, again, he was just the odd, annoying kid who was always trying to do something. And people got sick of him, and then they, roughed him up a little bit.
is there any sign of abuse, like of him being abused?
In his confession letter, he wrote that he was spanked. He wrote that he continued to wet his bed until age about 11 or 12. Most people stop wetting the bed about age 2 or 3 or something like that. And he wrote in his letter that his dad told him that you're lazy. Instead of getting up and going to the bathroom like everyone else, you're lazy. And I don't have the exact words in front of me, but struck him, hit him. I can't recall if it was with a belt or with his hand, but his dad was violent toward him because he was continuing to wet his bed until about age 11.
Fucking, I shit my pants 2 weeks ago. I'm not going around killing people. Fuck. I have no remorse for this human being. I only and hopefully, Steve, if you ever hear this, which is unlikely, please don't murder me, okay? Because I have no remorse for you. I have zero. Proceed. So he pissed his bed, so he killed people. Like, if he's using it as a crutch, if you're using, I pissed my bed. My dad was like, "What the fuck you doing pissing the bed at this age?" And beat you. Like, I'm pretty sure the three of us can say that we probably got smacked when we were kids, spanked, corporal punishment, what have you. I got it less so than other people I know, but I did get it. I ain't killing people. I ain't a pent-up ball of rage. There has to be something else, especially because you brought up the fact that, I'll say unconfirmed because he was never prosecuted in it. What would be the good way to put this? With the sexual assaults that he apparently committed, accused, I guess. But I don't even know if I can use accused, because if she hasn't contacted the police to file charges, then I don't know how to put it. But if he's being inappropriate with a bunch of people, and he's picking fights, doing all these things, I just feel like there has to be something else behind that layer. I don't believe people are born evil or just have that in them out of nowhere. Like something, it just seems like something went on with this guy. I'm looking at a picture of this motherfucker. This guy looks, you're completely right. Like, Josh, you're completely right. You don't want to run into this guy. And this guy has a face tattoo, okay? It's like anybody with a face tattoo, you're off the reservation. Completely. I don't even know if can I still use that term, Justin? Can I still say off the reservation, or is that off limits?
I don't know. I don't know these days.
Okay. Just checking in. I'm checking in.
I don't know.
But there has to be something, like, you never uncovered anything else other than, like, he pissed his bed? Like, it just seems so bizarre to me.
He did a lot of drugs. His parents liked to party. The kids in the neighborhood told me that, you guys ever heard of cross tops or black betties?
Black betty. It sounds familiar. Well, yeah.
It's basically a form of speed, right? It's a form of speed or crank. So stole those from the parents. He wrote in his letter that his mom, he threw both of his parents under the bus in ways I don't know if were necessary, but he said that his mom was, that she did lots of meth. Just some of the other stories. There's one girl who told me that Steve just walked in their house one day and went upstairs to where this girl was taking a shower, and then just opened up the shower and just stood there laughing as the girl is like screaming, "What the hell are you doing? Get the hell out of here." And he just stood there and looked at her and laughed. There's another girl who told me the story of how she was walking home from school and Steve basically followed her home from school. And once she got to her house, there's like a little bit of kind of like a courtyard from the street to the door. And she said that he was basically trying to rape her, and that the only thing that saved her was that her younger sister happened to come home and was able to use her backpack filled with books to just smack him enough times that he finally stopped. But again, he just laughed and just like walked away. There was another girl who told me that her and her friend were over at Steve Carlson's house, and the friend was dating or whatever you do when you're in junior high school with the with the young brother. And this girl says to me, "Oh, Steve starts to pay attention to me." And I'm like, "Oh, cool. An older boy likes me." And she said that she's in Steve's room, and Steve basically looks at her and says, "You're going to have sex with me whether you like it or not."
Jesus Christ.
And she just goes sprinting out of there, screaming and yelling, grabbing her friends, saying, "We are never going back to this guy's house. There's something wrong with this guy."
See, he just like my thing when you're telling me this story is everybody. I don't know this seems really bad in your case, but for me and James, like you can at least think of one person out of your entire high school that can kind of fit that kind of build. Like for you, Josh, you actually must have like you were there pretty much, but every community has that one or two oddball like that. And it goes to show you, like, you know, a lot of the tragedies that happen in American high schools in like the last, let's call it 10 years, can be traced back to an individual just like this. But, you know, their means and their motives might be different, but unstable people, you know, if they're not looked after at the right time, can do some really horrible things.
I guess that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around, Justin and Josh, is that, like, I guess in certain cases you can't explain it, but like for how minuscule his claims are of like, oh, you know, my dad smacked me, I pissed the bed, I did drugs and blah, blah, blah. It just seems like such extreme behavior. And typically speaking, somebody like this is going to, if as you said, throwing the parents under the bus, they're going to go full tilt and be like, my dad fondled me and did nasty things to me, and my mom knew about it and she never did anything about it. So this all comes from a deep-seated hatred for my upbringing because of the fact that I was molested and nothing ever, like, you hear this all the time, or like I was whipped or some other crazy shit. And this guy's like, it's like bottom of the barrel, just sounds like a normal situation, you know, that many people go through, and this guy's like calling foul on that. It just doesn't add up in my head. Am I wrong, Justin? Like I'm like, I don't know. I guess I'm looking for a reason that there can never be a reason.
Yeah, well, I just think that there's those kind of people everywhere. Just when things get pushed from a 9 to a 10, like I can think of several people I went to high school with who did very oddly similar things, but especially in like the last 20 years, it becomes almost impossible with cell phones and all this other stuff to kind of max those kind of behaviors. Like you can't make it like hearsay anymore in the modern era. Like once you catch an individual in your class doing a couple of these odd things, you can show that to somebody. But I'm trying to think of like in my grade 8, which would have been 1999, I had a student who was doing some pretty weird shit and he was very advanced to like, he was essentially like, I don't want to use the word rape, but he was pressuring a lot of people to having sex with him in grade 8 that I thought was like, what the fuck is this guy doing? But we're in a time when they're like MSN is not even really like the messenger programs of the day weren't being used. So there's nothing recording these people's behavior, but I couldn't even imagine 1984. Who the fuck's really going to believe that if you're an adult that, you know, this kid's doing all this wacky stuff and it's not becoming to the attention of even the school faculty.
Yeah. And then, you know, there's many of other things that he did before and after the murder that basically had the administration on high alert about him. But again, about halfway through his sophomore year, he gets sent to a different school, a continuation school, and then he just stops going and he ends up in juvenile hall for a while. And that's where the part becomes interesting, because once he's gone, it's like, oh, thank goodness he's gone. Like, we don't know what happened to him. We don't care. We just know that he's gone. And there's actually some people who, when he was in juvenile hall, they thought, oh, they must have arrested him for the murder of Tina Faelz, but they just can't say it because he's a minor. And that was not the case. It was a different situation that got him in juvenile hall. And but then I would say, let's see. So the murder happened in 84. So somewhere around 87, 88, maybe early 89, he leaves Pleasanton and he goes to Davis, California, which is about an hour and a half to the east. It's kind of a suburb of Sacramento. He has a family member that's there, and it's like, okay, looking for a new start. And again, it's just relief that this guy's he's out of sight, he's out of mind. Thank goodness he's gone. Also, by this point, everyone's graduated from high school who remembered what happened. And then he rapes a 13-year-old and spends 3.5 years in jail for lewd and lascivious acts on a minor.
How the fuck do you get 3 years for that?
Yeah. He said that it was consensual and that she lied about her age and all that. And, I talked to a girl who was there who basically stopped it from continuing on any further. And she's like, no, he knew how young she was. She was 13. She was not a little bit young. She was a lot young. So he spends 3.5 years or so in jail for that. And then that basically starts him on this path of being in and out of jail. And most of the time for probation violations, other times for drugs, once was for assault, just a wide variety of things that basically all come back to, this, the statutory rape that he committed. But while he's out of jail, he finds time to father 2 kids and get married once. And, but because of all of those things, at a certain point, he was then forced to take they call it the buccal swab of his mouth. And he has to basically register as part of the nationwide DNA system. And so once his DNA is in the system, that's what ultimately led to this murder from 1984 being solved, is because of everything else that he did. If he somehow had lived a life without crime, if he had, let's say it was just this drunken rage, maybe that was filled of drugs as well, and then realized, oh my goodness, what the heck have I done? And I really better, change my ways and all that. And let's say he had never committed any other crime the rest of his life, he would have gotten away with it. But it was because he continued to lead a life of crime that got his DNA in the system, and it took forever. Well, not forever, but it took 27 years, but the DNA finally caught up to him.
Just as an odd question, what year was it that the United States allowed DNA evidence in court? Would you know that off the top?
I want to say that it was the early 90s.
Okay.
Is what I want to say, because the reason why I say that is that the other part that became interesting about the Tina Faelz case is that there was 4 girls who were all murdered within I think it was a 11 to 12 month span. They were all roughly the same age, all within about a 30-mile radius. And so there was fear that there was a serial killer going around who was targeting teenage girls. And so they put together, meaning Pleasanton Police Department, Alameda County Sheriff, Contra Costa County Sheriff, multi-jurisdiction, all got together to see if there was any similarities, to see if there was one person who did all of these things. As it turned out, the task force was disbanded. They found that there were some clues that basically the only clues were that they were all about the same age and they were all roughly the same area. But that was really it. And for each one of those girls, they eventually were able to figure out who did it. And every time that person was captured, they checked in to see whether or not that person might have done one of these others. And each time, Pleasanton police thought, oh man, we finally got him. He probably did Tina Faelz murder as well. And then they realized, no, we couldn't have, because he was out of state, or he was already in jail at that time, or he was living somewhere else, or there just wasn't any evidence. But one of those cases was really revolutionary about using DNA work, to go back to your question, Justin. And I believe it was sometime 92, 93, 94, honestly, sometime in that range.
Yeah, because that seemed like it opened the door to a lot of these cases that were just like, they were just dead on the vine. Like, without DNA, you can't 100% identify anybody. And I'm so glad that they were able to use that evidence to finally give some peace to that family.
I have questions regarding the DNA in specific, but you did touch on something that I did want to jump down a bit of a rabbit hole. This might be a long rabbit hole, but we'll see.
Okay.
You mentioned the other murders in the area. Okay. I'm sure in your investigations you heard rumblings of this as well, which is why I want to ask you your thoughts on it, and we can go as far down this rabbit hole as you like, or we can just pop right back out. There were a lot of rumblings, from what I've read into it, of Zodiac. the Zodiac killer having some involvement in this was a theory that apparently was going on for a long time with this murder and with the other murders in the area. Did you find anything with the other murders that felt like Zodiac? I'm fascinated with Zodiac, so I needed to touch on it.
So I think that in the case of the Zodiac killer, every time that there was an unsolved crime, you always just wondered if it was him. But for the most part, he took credit for almost all of his murders. Part of like his thing was that he liked to taunt the police. He liked to taunt the reporters. He liked to kind of brag about what he had done. And there was never anything with any of these girls in the, around 1984 of someone like that. So I'm sure that it was top of mind, but at the same time, I think that I would have to go back and look at Zodiac Killer's time frame, but that might have been when he was somewhat dormant in what he had been doing.
Yeah, so I just wondered if you had touched on it at all during your investigation, because I know a lot of people were trying to. I mean, you're completely correct. Everybody tries to account every unsolved murder ever for Zodiac. Stuff that happened a year ago was Zodiac. Well, let's face facts here, ladies and gentlemen. Zodiac is fucking dead. This guy would be like fucking like 95 years old now, probably, unless he was like 12 when he was committing the crimes. And he was seen as like a 42-year-old man, I think, was like, or 30s. Late 30s, early 40s. This guy's fucking dead. Okay, let's get over it. But at the time, I could see how people might think that. But getting back to so that was a quick pop in a rabbit hole. We're gonna pop back out. Maybe in the future we can talk about the Zodiac, Josh. We'll go fucking deep on the Zodiac one day. I'll look forward to that day because it's my secret obsession. Much like everybody else. I've looked at the cipher. Have you ever tried to look at the cipher? Have you ever tried to solve that shit, the unsolved cipher?
I can't. Yeah, I tried and I couldn't do it, and I gave up quickly before my brain got damaged by trying.
Yeah, I did like 5 minutes of it, and I was like, I'm dumb. What am I doing? I'm not a smart person. This is what the fuck am I trying to do here? This is way out of my league. So, the blood on the purse. Did Steve have any defensive wounds on him? How did the blood get there?
All very good questions. And that's what Steve's lawyer, that was her primary defense, that the prosecution did not give any evidence of how his blood got on there, or did not give enough evidence of how his blood got on there. Her argument was that there's any number of ways that his blood could have ended up on there. And it was such a tiny microscopic amount of blood. Here's some more background about the purse. Again, the purse is found in the tree above the body in 1984. Purse gets taken down by the lead investigator, puts it into like a brown bag, like a grocery bag, goes to police evidence. I would say sometime within, I'd have to check my own book, but let's just say within the next 2 to 3 months, it gets tested for fingerprints. DNA did not exist then, but fingerprints did. Check for fingerprints, comes back, no fingerprints, goes back in evidence, and it sits in evidence for over 20 years, right? The clue to this murder is just sitting there in an evidence locker, just waiting for DNA to be created, to be invented so that we can solve this. And it was a combination of the Tina Faelz case and also another case that is still open, a cold case from the nearby town of Dublin, where they're working on things together, the two police departments, and they submit a whole bunch of evidence to get tested. And to give you another indication of just how much evidence gets tested, it was in 2008 when the purse was sent to Virginia. It was a full 3 years before they finally got around to testing it. And here's the other part that's crazy. If they had tested it right away, Steve Carlson's DNA was not yet in the nationwide system. But because there was such a backlog at the FBI lab, and especially a cold case is not going to get the same type of urgency as some other case. So they had to wait 3 years before they finally test it. And in that time is when Steve was rearrested again and goes into a jail in which he has to do the mouth buccal swab. And now his DNA is there so that there can be a match.
That's like fucking manifest destiny. Like, Jesus Christ. What are the chances of that?
Right?
Justin, you know math. I don't know shit. What are the
I don't know
chances of that?
It's just incredible to think that it's a good thing that these police agencies held on to all of this evidence when realistically they're waiting for something like magical to help solve these cases, right? Because
Right.
like there's I remember there were even in the early the late 90s, they were testing things from the 50s and 60s, and you're like, how did these people, like, why would a police department hold on, like in this case, a purse from the 1980s, and now we're rolling into year 2000? It's kind of incredible that, you know, they were able to not only hold on to this evidence but preserve it so you can actually get DNA off of it. I think it's a great testament to, you know, police work in that regard.
And to go back to your question, James, about the blood and how his blood might have gotten on there. Again, the day of the murder, he was not questioned by police, but he was questioned by police. It was either the day after or 2 days after. And then they followed up again, like 3 or 4 days after that. And in the police report, they indicate that he had no cuts on his hands, that he appeared, nervous or anxious, but was cooperative, and they noticed no cuts on him.
I know where the blood came from.
So
I'll tell you where the blood came from. I'll tell you.
Tell me.
I'll tell you,
Okay.
Josh. He's a fucking drug addict. He's snorting shit. When you snort a bunch of fucking, when you're doing speedballs and all this shit, you're snorting them, your nose bleeds. When you do enough drugs, it eats away at your septum, your nose bleeds. I'm just putting it out there that that's probably where it came from. He probably is, and nose fucking gushes some blood or some shit.
Yeah.
I'm just putting that out there. What's your thoughts there?
That's possible. What the prosecution put forth was that, and I'm going to mess up the terminology here unless I check my own book, but basically, when you're doing a stabbing motion, there's going to be some type of slippage, especially after that many cuts, in which, your finger, your palm of your hand, your wrist, or something, and this is, I feel really awkward in even saying this and kind of like thinking this through, but when you're repeatedly making a stabbing motion, that there's going to be some type of slippage, especially when there was that. I mean, the amount of blood that she lost was enormous.
But you did say that they said that there was no cuts on his hands. Do you think that was just police ineptitude?
Either they were really small cuts that he was able to wash off, or police ineptitude. Again, because they were talking about small amounts of his blood that ended up on her purse. So
let me ask you, Josh. You grew up in the town. How was your police department? Were they? Was this like? I can't even use Barney Fife. That's fucking. People don't even know what that is. You'd be like, what the fuck is a Barney Fife? What's a good example, Just like? I
don't even know what the hell Barney Fife is.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Josh laughed. He's like, I know what you're talking about.
I remember. Yeah.
Most people.
Again, I would go back to, there had been 5 murders in Pleasanton from World War II to 1984, and none of them involved a kid.
How many of those were solved?
At the time, all of them had been solved.
Okay, so I can't say complete police ineptitude.
But at the same time, like that, put it this way, the main detectives who worked the case, this might have been their first murder. It's probably their first murder. Or it's not, put it this way, they didn't have a lot of experience in murders.
I can completely understand that, because I ended up moving out to a small town, and we just had local, like the state police essentially was the only police for the town. And these people were a joke. And I remember the first murder that happened in our town, every single police officer abandoned every single post, and there was 26 police cars outside this house, and every cop took it upon their duty to investigate every single person, like, because they had no experience. This is the first big thing that has ever happened to them. And they look like a complete, in my experience where I came from, they look like a complete shit show. Like, they didn't know what the fuck to do. They didn't know who to call in. Like, this is just the state, like provincial police where we're from. And they didn't have a clue. and they abandoned everything. There was no cops anywhere in town except for this one house. So for me, I can see like a small town not having any expertise on how to do, like what you said about talking to all the kids at the same time does not seem like something a normal police department would ever do with experience of like a city cop wouldn't do something like that.
Do you think I totally got what you're saying, Justin? Josh, do you think they dropped the ball? Do you think the cops dropped the ball?
The bottom line is, I think no. I think there's a lot of things they could have done differently. And obviously I waited a long time and hemmed and hawed before I started to answer.
No, I like that you thought of your answer before, like, because it is a complicated question at the end of the day, right?
There's certainly things that they could have done differently. But let's go back to the basic facts. There was no witnesses. There was no cameras. There was very little evidence at the crime scene. The police chief told me that it was the coldest crime scene that he had ever seen, meaning just no clues, right? And I think that the bottom line is, for all of the crime shows that you guys watch, or for the audience who's going to listen to this, how often is it a 16-year-old kid who does it? Especially back in the 80s, how often was it a 16-year-old kid? Usually you look at the family, and that's who they looked at. They looked at, the mom, okay, well, there's this guy who just moved into the house. The mom was a single mom, and well, this guy's kind of shady, and this guy's friend is kind of shady. And what about the stepdad? And what about the biological dad? And what about this guy? And what about, there was all of these strange individuals who neighbors said, you need to look into this guy. This guy's not quite right. So they're chasing their tail on all of these adults that know her and that know the family. And there was one other thing that happened too. When I mentioned that there was 4 cases that were all really similar, the first of those 4 cases, the one that happened just before the Tina Faelz murder, was this one where it was a girl who was almost the exact same age. She was found in a remote area, and there was a girl who came forward, and she said that, pointed the finger. It said these 3 people did it. She had this elaborate story of what happened. As it turned out, she made up the entire thing. It was in this nearby town of Fremont, and the city of Fremont and the sheriff's department looked like absolute fools because they believed this 13-year-old girl who completely fabricated the story. They wasted weeks in the investigation chasing these leads that never would have possibly been able to follow. And so maybe there was some just hesitancy to believe teenagers because this was so fresh on the minds of the police about how they had been embarrassed. And so now, again, we don't think a teenager did it. This is too gruesome for a teenager. Let's look for the adults in her life.
Do you think it's possible that she had confronted him about the allegations prior, and that this is what it was all about? Do you think that's maybe what this was all about?
It's possible that that's what it was all about. So one of the things that became interesting in my reporting is that I think it was 2008, and there's a weekly, it's called Pleasanton Weekly, that did a front page cover story, basically said, who killed Tina Faelz? So this story comes out 3 years before they get the hit on the DNA and they get the arrest. And the story didn't really have any new details. It kind of rehashed everything. But what's most interesting was the comments. And the comments still live on to this day. I actually went back and looked at the comments again within the past couple of weeks. And you can see where there's a whole bunch of comments right after the story comes out. And then like 3 months later, there's a few more. And then like 6 months later, there's a few more. And then like a year later, there's a few more. And one of the comments, like 3 months afterwards, says, maybe they should look to see if there was any classmates who might have lived around the area who they should probably look in to see if there was a classmate, right? And then you see like this other one where someone says flat out, I think it was Steve Carlson, and this is why, and lays out a full scenario about what happened.
Fuck.
And one of the stories is that during this party, that took place at the house before the murder. Again, this is just a comment on a message board, but the comment on the message board said that one of the guys said to Steve, "You're such a loser. You couldn't even get laid by that Tina Faelz girl." Again, this is total hearsay. This is someone who wasn't there, said that he had heard this. He posted on a message board, but enough people read that it started to take on a life of its own, that must be what happened. And the prosecution was never quite able to ascertain whether or not that really happened and introduce that in court. And I didn't really spend too much time on that in the book, other than just to mention this is what happened. This person wrote this comment. And by the way, the person who wrote that comment is actually one of the students who found the body.
Cool. So
he's very reliable from the standpoint that, well, he found the body and he knew. So again, was it because Tina knew what had been going on with her friend? Is it because that there had been this party and somebody had basically challenged Steve? Remember, both were having a really bad day. Tina had rocks thrown at her at lunch and was threatened that she was going to get her ass kicked.
That's the most tragic part to the story, in my opinion. That's just fuck.
Yeah, she should have been on the bus going home. Tina did not have the best home life as well. She's having a bad day. Steve's having a bad day, and he's drunk, and he's probably on a bunch of drugs. And then they end up at the same place at the same time.
Part of your book goes over the drug addiction that was rampant around the area among all these people. You want to go into that a bit? Like, was it also
Sure.
the families and like, how did that affect the community, especially, well, I would say before and after the murder?
Drugs were definitely look, most of the drugs that kids did in Pleasanton in the 80s was pot, right? They smoked a little pot, and it wasn't high grade pot like it is nowadays. It was pretty light.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
Then, and then again, there is stories about cross tops and Black Betties and crank and things like that, where kids started to do a little bit more. And certainly Steve's drug use became way more apparent after the murder. And he wrote in his confession letter that he did meth to numb the pain, to help him forget what he had done. It's not like Pleasanton was this place where it's just rampant drug use everywhere, where everyone's on the side of the street doing drugs. It's mostly a bunch of kids who just had a little bit of pot, right? So it's not like it was a squeaky clean town, but it's also not like it was but again, it was the 80s, right? And
it sounds like it's just typical. Like, you're going to have pot everywhere, cigarettes, that kind of low grade nonsense. And the good stuff, if I'm just, I'm using that word, the expensive stuff comes in and out, but there's no real source to it. It's not like really monitored. It's like, oh, I got a bunch of like cocaine, and you have one night of it. It's not like you have a continual source. Like, I would find it very difficult for a 14-year-old to be able to consistently buy methamphetamines. Like, it's not something that's real. Like, you can get access to it, but I couldn't see him using it every single day.
unless you have the right hookup.
That's all I got. I can't see anybody using that every single day. Like 14, that's a lot of money. That's not a cheap habit.
Yeah.
That's just my perspective on it.
Were drugs like pretty rampant in the among the adults in the community?
I mean, it's hard to make a sweeping generalization of that. Look, it was the 80s, and
hair metal was in full swing.
Hair metal was a thing.
Pac-Man just came out.
Yeah.
People were playing Pong.
Crack was an issue in Oakland. Crack was really not an issue in Pleasanton. Some of the parents, were very wealthy and probably did some cocaine or did a little bit more than a little bit of cocaine. It's not like it's some state like now where there's this huge heroin issue because people got addicted to pain pills and things like that. So I don't want to make it look like I'm trying to defend my hometown, but I also don't want to, I think similar to what Justin said. Yeah, there was some. It wasn't over the top, rampant, and bad, but there's, put it this way. I know a lot of kids I went to the same high school. I was, 4 years or so behind them. And I know a lot of kids who they didn't have a problem finding drugs, right? Whether or not they had the money for it, whether or not they wanted to. If you wanted to get drugs, you could find some. Somebody had some.
Yeah, this just seems like a typical town. I don't think anything more than that. Like you're not like downtown, like any city in North America, name it Chicago, Montreal, like all these places where you can go down to the corner and there's something there and it's cheap. Small town, it seems like normal kid stuff. I know it doesn't seem right, but when you're in high school, you always know there's a crowd that does something a little bit more than. These are the people who don't go anywhere. Like really,
right?
It's the people in high school who don't go anywhere because they're baked all the time and then they fail. Like every community's got to have that.
Now, Josh, just to kind of sidestep here, I just wanted you to explain. So I'm sure you're familiar with the photo. I'm looking at the crime scene photo. There's a police officer on the right looking down the escarpment, and you got the drainage ditch there. Looks like maybe a creek. A creek. How do we say this word?
Creek. Yeah, creek.
A creek. And it's all fenced off. Now I do see like an opening on the right side of the photo. So I'm just trying to, because where her body is, I'm just trying to figure out. The cop is standing in the foreground. Everything's fenced off. You have some wooden fencing that maybe you could squeeze through. And then you have kind of an opening in the fence. It looks like an opening in the fence line with this giant bush kind of sitting in front of it. I'm just trying to get an idea of what the path was that the kids were taking, because you had mentioned the underpass. So if her body was found there, it's obviously not. I had it in my mind that it was like, I know you said before the underpass, but I'm just trying to figure out how you're walking through this creek area.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the exact photo that you are referring to so that I can look at it at the same time as you. Now, are you looking at a photo where there's like a white flash, because that's where we blurred out the body?
That's right. Yeah, that one.
Okay. So let me see if I can find that photo.
I believe it's
that we had
170014.
Do you have what page?
Is the photo? I don't have the pit. No, unfortunately, I'm not that cool.
Oh.
Let me see.
So aerial views. The aerial views give a much better view of where the kids would be able to walk.
Yeah, let me. I wish I had that. I don't have that.
Do you have the book, or you just have like a digital copy of the book, or what do you have?
Yeah, and I'm trying to like scroll through it, but I'm terrible at.
Well, like page 72, page 73 have some aerial photos. The lead detective got into a.
Haven't finished it yet, Josh. Still reading.
Okay. Lead detective got into a plane a few days later and was able to take some photos of everything from up above. And that's where it can give you a much better view.
Okay, here we go. Page 7. Yeah, okay.
72. Okay. So you can see where the highway goes. The bottom of the highway is going south.
Okay.
That's the side that she was found on.
Justin's completely oblivious to what we're looking at.
Okay.
Right now.
It's all good. It's okay.
The cars that are going to the left at the top, those are going north. Tina's neighborhood is on the other side, and you can see where they're starting to make the cutout for what as the neighborhood's going to expand. That's on the bottom left, and then right in the middle, you can see there's like this dirt path that goes through, and then there's another dirt path that goes from where the houses are that kind of cuts right through to where this drainage ditch is.
Right.
And so that would have been the path that Steve would have taken in order to get to that area. And that area, there's a whole bunch of trees that are right there. And
is that fencing off areas for an expansion then to the town? Okay.
Yeah. And that fencing has been broken into, right? It's supposed to keep kids out of there, but the kids broke into that.
I just found it kind of strange that like where she's like, I guess you'd be walking across the rock face there, like the rocked area that's kind of going through.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In order to get down there, I never went down there myself. I
I find it weird that you wouldn't use the other side. I don't know. That's kind of strange to me.
Yeah. But like on page 65, you can see, I mean, that's Steve's house. That's prominently, displayed, or you can, and his bedroom is above the garage, and he's got the view of that whole field. He's got the view of the high school to the left. There's a shadow. That's a helicopter that's kind of, that's hovering above. And there's people that are standing right at the front door in the lawn of Steve's house. So, I mean, that goes to show just how, I mean, when I say he was across the street, I mean,
he was literally, 100%. You know what Justin kind of said about when we were touching on if this guy was looking out the window, I could see how that would be viable.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, when it comes to a premeditated crime, the unfortunate thing is that you'll never truly know because the scumbag's never going to fucking tell you, right? He's never going to tell you, okay, yeah, this is exactly what happened. Try to be the next episode of How to Make a Murderer, or whatever that show is, where people are, I was innocent this whole time, I wrote those letters under duress. It actually wasn't me. You never know what's coming next, but you can see it. It's clear as day. And I think it's just really unfortunate that nobody took a look at, you're going door to door almost, right? It's like
right.
Doorstep to crime scene. And you would think as a detective, and I'm not trying to besmirch the detectives at all, but I'm just saying you would think they would go, where's our visibility? It's there. There's a bunch of kids partying in this house, which obviously they knew, which is like right there. It just seems odd to me. I don't know. I get it. They're not used to dealing with this type of crime, but that's neither here nor there. I appreciate you walking me through that. I wanted to...
And that's where that quasi alibi ended up hurting the investigation so much, and this guy, Todd Smith, I've talked with him a couple of times. When Steve wrote the letters, I called Todd to let him know about it. And Todd said, I knew it. It was very emotional. He was breaking down into tears, and he has felt extreme guilt and remorse over the years.
Todd, if you ever listen to this, not your fault, brother. I mean, that shit could happen to anybody during questioning. You're a kid. You don't know what the fuck's going on. And somebody you knew just got murdered. You don't know. So don't feel, Todd, if you ever listen to this, don't feel bad. I mean, I know it's a weight you probably need to carry. I can't imagine carrying that weight. That would suck. I mean, the whole situation is just, I guess I'm still a little confounded as to how somebody could commit a crime like this, or in general. I don't have a murder bone in my body until, it's just so bizarro to me. I haven't reached the point, I'm assuming that you did get to speak to Shirley Faelz about the situation.
Before Shirley passed away, I did. So Shirley is Tina's mother. And the day that the trial was originally scheduled to begin, she died of a heart attack that morning.
Shit.
I was able to talk to Shirley before that.
That's the worst, man. You die before you see justice.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. I remember when I first started thinking about writing this book, it's like, where the heck do you begin, right? I've never written a true crime. Again, I'm a sports guy, right? I've been a sports writer and a play-by-play announcer and the host of post-game Dodger Talk, and now I'm going to try and write a true crime. And I had no idea where to start. But I remembered thinking, legally, I don't need the permission of anybody to write this book. But I want to make sure that the family is okay with me writing it. And if they're not, then I'm not going to pursue this. And so, am I going to cold call her, right? Am I just going to knock on the door? Am I going to pick up the phone? So I wrote an old-fashioned letter, put a stamp on it, mailed it to her. And the day that it arrived, she read it, and she called me instantly. And she said that'd be great. She was thankful that someone cared enough about her daughter and the story that wanted to tell it. And I wanted to still I met with her in person. And what was really weird was that I walked in the house and walked in the front door, turned left, went down the hallway, living room, sat down at the kitchen table, and I'm looking around and I realized this is the exact same floor plan that my childhood house was. In fact, I even said, okay, which room was Tina's? And Shirley told me, okay, it's when you walk in, it's the one that's on the right. And I said, okay, so that was my sister's room, was Tina's, and my room was Tina's younger brother, Drew. And then, the master bedroom is in back.
Oh, wow. It's like a mirror, eh?
Yeah. And so, I mean, on one hand, that allowed me to like immediately just be able to visualize the house, 100%. And, and so Shirley was, I write about it in the book. I don't want to disparage the deceased, but Shirley was already having problems before her daughter was murdered. And then Shirley's started to have more and more psychological problems. And certainly the murder of her daughter and the police's inability to solve it, and also just the lingering wonder about whether or not it was somebody that Shirley knew, whether it was a boyfriend or a boyfriend's friend, or whether somebody like that might have been involved, weighed on her dramatically. And she would call me out of the blue from time to time just to say hello, just to see if I was still working on the book and just to see if I had heard anything. And she told me many times, I know in my heart it's him. I know they got the right guy. I know it's him. She continued to tell me that she knew that she was not right physically and mentally, but she said, I'm going to get myself right for the trial. I'm going to be there for the trial. I'm going to be ready. I'm going to get myself right. And unfortunately she did not. So yeah, she never got to hear the words guilty, and she never got to read the letters.
Sad. That's depressing. This is the most depressing episode of Surreal Terrell yet. Wicked. That's so sad. Let me ask you, Josh. And this is going to be a loaded question. You can go off on a diatribe on it. I don't care, but I'm very curious. This obviously affected your life very heavily when you were young, and probably always sat in the back of your brain somewhere. How do you think this informed your life, and how did it feel to finally end the journey? Because, I mean, I think if I went through something like this, closing the book on it, we're like, now it's done. I know you wrote the follow-up article recently. Congratulations on that. But that must be a challenge in its own, just knowing like this is done and I could put this to bed, but can you ever really put it to bed? So, I mean, it's a loaded, I don't even know if there's a question in there, but I think you know what I mean. Like I'm curious of how it informed your life, how you live within the back of your head, and I guess just trying to speak for somebody who can't speak for themselves.
A number of things come to mind. Number one, numerous people have told me, both when the book came out and when my follow-up article in the San Francisco Chronicle came out, they said, thank you for giving us a voice. Tina's brother told me that. Tina's best friend, not the one who had been raped, but the best friend, and others said, thanks for giving us a voice. And a lot of people from my town who either I knew because we were classmates, or they were a few years above me or a few years below me, they always wanted to know. And without being too corny, I'm proud that I was the one who was able to tell the story. And I remember just thinking
about that, brother.
I was just, I felt like if anyone can tell the story, maybe it's me. Hopefully it's me, because I lived it. From a just like a journalistic standpoint, I learned what it means to do really hard interviews. Like, I used to think that a hard interview was talking to the closer after he gives up a game-winning home run in the 9th inning. And you're like, so what pitch were you throwing? Or, like, did you miss your spot? Or, I used to think that those were hard questions. Those are not hard questions. Hard questions is talking to the mother of the victim. Hard questions are contacting somebody whose daughter used to be married to this guy and trying to piece together what happened to Steve Carlson when he moved to Davis and trying to contact and find all of those people and introduce who I am and what I'm doing. And then most of the time, when you tell somebody what you're doing and they Google you and they go, wait a minute, is this the same guy? This guy, you write baseball, you talk about baseball. You're the guy who's going to do this true crime. And like, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. If you can help me out, I'd really appreciate it. I think that there is something to be said for admitting to people, I don't know what I'm doing for sure. Help me out. And I would use that type of line to police officers and detectives and prosecution. I would say, look, I admit I'm not an expert on this. I'm not a true crime writer. I don't cover cops or courts for the newspaper. Help walk me through it. And I think you disarm people in that way where they wanted to then like explain it to you. I'll say, explain it to me like I'm a third grader. Like, how does this process work? How does DNA work? How does the court system work? So I learned a lot that way. But in terms of will this ever go away, the story in my mind, no. I can tell you that, the timing was so surreal. It was about a week or two before the letters came to light. And so I've been furloughed from my job with the isotopes, and I'm talking to somebody and they're like, oh, you should do a follow-up to your book. And I said, what's the follow-up? There's no follow-up unless he hangs himself in prison or unless he, confesses, and he's never going to confess, then there's nothing new to tell in this story. And then lo and behold, about a week or two later, I get a text message from Tina's brother that says, Steve letters confessed. And, the way that it worked is Steve agreed through his lawyer to allow the family to read the letters. The district attorney's office could not give the letters to me, but the district attorney's office could give the letters to the family, and then whatever the family wants to do with them, they can. And so Drew's family, they trusted me. I got to know them, and they forwarded me the letters, and I was then able to, contact the San Francisco Chronicle and do some additional reporting, a bunch more additional reporting as well, in order to be able to write the story. But again, I think it just comes down to this story will never go away, but giving people a voice. I remember there was at my book signing, the launch party, one of Tina's aunts, or maybe it was somebody, she just came up to me and she just hugged me and she just like started crying and hugged me. And I remember feeling like, you haven't even read the book. What if you don't like it? and she said, just thank you for caring. Thank you for caring enough to do this. And I remember talking to Tina's biological father, who is in the state of Washington, and he feels a lot of regret and remorse that he was not a better father, that he had basically abandoned her. And at the end of the interview, I remember saying, thank you for your time. And he said, thank you for listening. And I realized that there was a lot of people who never got therapy as a result of this. Maybe it's just because the 80s were not a time where people got therapy. And 3 decades later, when a reporter is asking them about it, I don't want to pretend like I'm a therapist, but I think it helped them talk about something that they mostly just wanted to avoid talking about.
It's also very heavy. Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, and I have a lot of respect to your approach and how you contacted the family too. Like, just not like having that kind of respect going into it. Definitely, not only did it pay off for you recently, right? But just in the sense that, you did end up building a very good personal bond with that family, just from your approach to it. And I think that's very much to be appreciated, especially because it's like, sometimes that kind of invasiveness is not wanted or warranted, but the way that you kind of approached it, I have a lot of respect for that.
Thank you. I just, it was both the right thing to do, but also a practical thing to do, because there were some people who didn't want to talk to me. There were some people who told me flat out, you're trying to profit off this girl's death. Shame on you. Counter that by saying, the family knows what I'm doing. They have my support. The family has given me names and phone numbers, and they're sharing all of these photos with me and all of these things. Then that, if nothing else, it's just good for your own psyche that that you're on the right path, even if some people are accusing you of just trying to profit off some girl's murder.
When the idea came into your came into your psyche to do it, I know you had mentioned it, but I don't want to mess up the timeline. Had they already done the DNA hit at that time?
Yeah. Yeah. So,
so prior to you even thinking about doing it, the DNA hit had happened?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I to be honest, I had it's not that I had forgotten about it because this was such a big part, but it's not like it was in my mind every day.
Right.
I was living in Los Angeles at the time, learned that they had gotten this DNA hit and that this guy had been arrested, and started to talk to my sister and different people like that. That was August of 2011. Started working on the book about a month later. The preliminary hearing was sometime in the summer of 2012. The trial was in the fall of 2014. Another side story. So I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I'm doing Dodgers pre and post game work. The next year, 2012, I was in between jobs. I was doing a lot of freelance work. Then I moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico for this current job with the Isotopes. And because it had taken so long for the trial to begin, and I had kind of given up on the job, on the book. I didn't know if I could do it, especially living in another state. And it just so happened that one of my really close friends was getting married in the Bay Area, and I was going to his wedding. And the day after the wedding is when the trial was supposed to start. And I thought, all right, well, maybe the universe is speaking to me and things are lining up here for a reason. And when I was at the courthouse, Tina's family, her aunt, her cousin, her brother, they came up to me and they said, please finish this book. We want you to finish this book. You're so close. We're going to get an answer to this. And so their encouragement pushed me over the edge to make sure. I didn't know if I could find a book deal. But I remember coming back from the Bay Area after having been at the trial. And then I said, I got to do this. I got to find a way. And fortunately, History Press was willing to publish it.
And it's so good that you did it. Honestly, Josh, I mean, you gave a family a voice, I think, not just Tina, in letting them know what happened. And hopefully the thing that I'm worried about is that this guy's going to get out. He has another hearing coming up. Is that right?
Next one will be no sooner than 3 years from now.
Okay. Well, in 3 years, if this guy comes out of prison, we'll talk.
I'm moving to Toronto. Yeah.
You can come on down. We have a spot in the studio. We put a pup tent. I can't promise a cot. You might have to sleep on a floor, but we'll get some baseball bats. Justin practices.
My opinion's different.
Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Yeah,
he could defend you.
My opinion, Josh, stay in the States where you can have lots of guns and live in a nice.
Yeah, but if Josh has a gun, he has a gun too, man. Come on, let's. I'm just saying.
I don't think he's going to get out. I don't think. Put it this way: maybe when he's 70 or 80 years old, and then he gets out. I can't fathom that any parole board. I've never been on a parole board. I've never talked to anyone who's been on a parole board, but if he had committed 0 crimes in his life except for this murder, maybe they give him the benefit of the doubt that you were 16 and you've served X number of years. But when you look at everything that he's done in his life, previous attempts at rehabilitating him have clearly not worked. So I can't fathom he would get released.
Well, I can just imagine that Justin's proud of me for not going off on the fact that this guy's like touching children, doing naughty things, because I go off about that. That comes up, I usually go off. I went reserved on that. So, I mean, be proud of me, Justin. I put the rage genie back in the bottle tonight.
I'm proud of you that you learned some basic self-control.
If only this motherfucker had. Jesus Christ. All right, so we end off every episode with this question. So here's where you get to go a little freaky. Serial Trail is a never-ending quest to find out why we are sentient and what it means to have consciousness. So, what is your take?
Can you repeat the question again?
Of course, everybody always asks.
I'm stalling so I can come up with something philosophical.
He asked the most awkward question of all time. So good luck trying to answer the most hardest question that no one has ever figured out in the history of humanity, and you've got to do it apparently live on the spot right now. So can you tell me what consciousness is and the difference between that and being a sentient being and how that all plays into your life? Go. Hardest question that no one on this planet, our greatest thinkers, cannot come to a resolution, and you got to figure it out.
I like people's perception on it. What do you want from me?
Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and sometimes it rains, and you play a doubleheader the next day.
Nice.
Is that your fucking sign off when you're done your show? Like when you're done
I
report?
just stole that from Bull Durham.
Oh, okay. Well, obviously I don't know anything that he's ever said.
No, the movie Bull Durham. It's about minor league baseball. Find it. It's really funny.
I don't sport at all, Josh, but I mean, quite frankly, I think if you ever join us for another conversation, you're going to teach me about baseball because I feel after this conversation, I don't know about you, Josh, but I feel like I have no wind left in my sails at all. It's a very sad fucking conversation. And this is the first time we've ever done a true crime episode. And I think it's going to be a while before we do another one because it's too sad. I mean, I feel for this young lady. I feel for her family. I feel for, the town that it was affected. I feel for you who was affected by it, all her friends. And it just the amount of synchronicity in the fact that she's picked on, rocks thrown at her, and then all of a sudden it's too much. And the fact that her mom never got to see the trial, like it's too much, and it's too sad. I don't think I want to do another true crime episode. I'm done. Let's talk about baseball.
I've gotten asked a lot of times if I'm gonna do more true crimes now, and I say no. Like this is exhausting. I don't know how the police do it. I don't know how prosecution does it. I don't know how defense attorneys do it. Said no, like I want to go back to talking about baseball.
You have 2 books on baseball as well. We also end the show off. It's time for self-promotion. Just plug away, sir. Go for it.
The other book that's much more fun is I wrote about the 1988 Los Angeles Dodgers World Series championship. I know you guys are not huge baseball fans, but you might have heard of Kirk Gibson and this really famous home run that he hit.
I don't know. Justin might be. I've never asked him. Justin, you like baseball?
I have no idea about sports.
Okay. So we're both sports and
so don't worry.
MMA. We could talk about MMA. Like that'd be great.
I love to learn about new things. So yeah.
Anyways, it's called Miracle Man. It's about the '88 Dodgers. That one's that's the other book that and there's a third book that I wrote when I was really young, and I'm glad I did it, but I made a bunch of mistakes that I wish I could do over, but I can't. So I usually don't talk about that one as much.
What about fiction?
That's the best thing to do. That's fine. It's like that was your first. That's what I always do. It's like, no matter what I do, there's the first draft that I don't even put my name on. Let it burn. Get my criticism. And the next one has my name on it.
That was like my early porn career when I was going as Chester Fields. Like, thank God those tapes don't exist. What about fiction, Josh? You gonna do fiction, or you ever thought about some?
I tried to write a fiction book, and believe it or not, I thought it was much harder. I thought that when all you have is the truth, and the truth just guides you. But whenever you can just make up anything, I found it to be really difficult. Maybe at some point I'll have to try again, but I just found it to be really hard.
Yeah,
I can hear you on that. Fiction's nonsense anyway. Stick with what you're best at. Telling truth.
I think you should do a history of baseball book, like just from the inception, where it came from. I would love to see that book.
There's probably 20 of them that are already out.
Yeah, but there isn't one written by you, and that's the difference, right?
Maybe you know what? Maybe you should come back on and literally give us the entire breakdown from your perspective, because baseball is such a bizarro sport to me that I don't understand anything about it. And it's too complex to get in right now, but I don't even understand. I played it.
If you've made it this far in your life without paying attention to baseball, you've probably saved a lot of money by not buying the clothes and the equipment and the tickets and everything else that's involved with it. And so you should probably not go down that rabbit hole.
I like your style. Get up while you're ahead.
I'm not going to lie. I think it's the most boring fucking thing on the face of the planet. And if you could sway me like a millimeter, in that, then we succeeded in something. I'm not sure what that something is, but it exists in the ether of the universe.
Next time I go to Toronto, we'll go to a Jays game, and if nothing else, we'll just have a bunch of beers.
You're on.
Right.
You're on.
Borderline free in this city.
Let us know. I mean, we'll all be wearing masks, so I won't know if it's actually you. And all of a sudden, the mask comes off, and it's this fucking tattoo face scumbag. You talk about me on your podcast? Guess what? I'm out of prison. This guy, I just want to, we're going to end the show on the fact that everybody needs to look up a picture of this guy and just memorize the face. Hopefully COVID goes away so he's not wearing a mask, and you'll be able to see a face if he gets out, because this guy's fucked. And I have no sympathy for you, but please don't murder me. That's pretty much that's what I'm landing at, because I did an interview one time. This guy's like, fuck it, I'm on this guy's list. Where can we find the book there? Murder in Pleasanton, Tina Faelz, and the Search for Justice. Where can we find it?
You can go to Amazon.com. It's probably the easiest way. And type in my name or type in Murder in Pleasanton. It'll pop up. Or I guess you can always go to my website, which is joshuasuchon.com, and you can contact me. There's a contact button. And I can, and if you want to just Venmo me the money, I'll sign it for you and I'll put it in the mail.
I bought a Kindle version. This is bullshit.
Remember to sign the Kindle? That's not going to be work.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to read anything anymore. It's even worse. Justin, any closing remarks?
No, this is fantastic conversation at moments and depressing at others, but
I feel fucking, I'm sad. I'm sad after it, but I'm glad we had the conversation. Josh, thanks so much for joining us on Surreal to Real, the most depressing episode yet.
Thanks for having me.
It's a great conversation. Take us out, Justin. Take us out.
Everybody have a great night.
I hope everybody sleeps well after listening to this. I'm not going to. Good night, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Surreal to Real. Make sure that you never miss an episode. Hit that subscribe button, and while you're at it, like, share, and shout it from the rooftops. Surreal to Real is available with new episodes weekly on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Intro music is performed by Jonathan Boyle. Outro music is performed by Rob Rock. Announcer voice by me. This has been a Surreal to Real production. Copyright Surreal to Real Productions 2020. Mr. Announcer Voice out.